It was the early years of the Republic of China, a time when old traditions clashed with new ideologies. While cities buzzed with the excitement of modernization, places like Qingyan village remained untouched, hidden deep within the mountains. I, Lin Rui, a folklore student, was sent to document the ancient customs that still thrived in these remote corners. The journey to Qingyan was grueling. Path wound through dense forests, shrouded in mist so thick it seemed to swallow sound. When I finally reached the village, it felt like stepping back in time. The stone houses, weathered and sagging, stood huddled together as if warding off the encroaching wilderness. The air was heavy, tinged with the scent of damp earth and something less identifiable, an odor that clung like a residue. The villagers were distant, their gazes fleeting, their expressions guarded. When I tried to speak to them, they turned away, their silence more telling than words. It was as if they carried a burden, a knowledge they refused to share with an outsider. Despite the unsettling atmosphere, I pressed on, eager to uncover the stories that lingered in this forgotten place. But beneath my curiosity lay a gnawing unease, a sense that something was profoundly wrong in Qingyan. The turning point came when I met Granny, an elderly woman whose eyes seemed to carry the weight of countless untold stories. Her home was a sanctuary of the past, filled with the scent of burning herbs and relics of a bygone era. Every corner was crowded with talismans, scrolls, and objects that seemed to vibrate with a life of their own. "You've come to learn about our customs," Granny said, her voice thin and worn by years. "But there are stories here best left in the shadows." Something in her tone pulled me closer, and I gently urged her to share more. After a pause, Granny began to speak, her words measured and filled with a gravity that demanded attention. "Once there was a woman named Ava," she began, her gaze unfocused as if looking inward. "She was beautiful, but beauty can be a curse. Ava was never satisfied. She craved more admiration, more youth, more power, and in her vanity she sought the shaman's help, asking him for a way to preserve her beauty forever." Granny's voice dropped to a near whisper, as if the walls themselves might betray the secret. The shaman agreed, but the ritual he offered was no gift. It was a curse, a face-swapping ritual that required a mask made of living flesh. A chill of realization settled over me. A face-swapping ritual? Granny nodded, her face grave. Yes, under the light of a full moon, Ava took the face of a young girl, believing it would grant her eternal beauty. But what she gained instead was a curse far worse than death. The story Granny wove was one of horror and inevitable doom. Ava's beauty, once her greatest asset, became her prison. For a time she reveled in her new face, basking in the admiration it brought. But soon the mask revealed its true nature. It was never truly hers, Granny said, her voice trembling with the weight of the tale. The spirit of the girl whose face she stole began to haunt her. At first it was just whispers, gentle, pleading. But as the days passed, those whispers grew into cries, demands for what had been taken. The villagers noticed the change in Ava. Her once flawless face began to decay, the flesh softening, sagging as if rotting from within. Her screams filled the night, but no one dared approach her. They knew the ritual had gone horribly wrong, that vanity had led her to a fate worse than any punishment the living could imagine. "Her beauty became her torment," Granny continued, her voice hollow. "In the end she was found lifeless, her face a grotesque mix of decayed flesh and bone, neither hers nor the girl's. They buried her deep in the forest, hoping the earth would swallow the curse along with her." Granny's story left an imprint on me, a gnawing discomfort that I couldn't shake. It was meant as a cautionary tale, but something in her voice, the way her hands trembled as she spoke, made it feel all too real. And so, despite the growing sense of dread, I knew I had to learn more. Days passed, but I couldn't rid myself of the thoughts of Ava. The village seemed to retreat further from me. The villagers avoided my eyes, speaking in low tones when they thought I couldn't hear. The fear in their gazes wasn't just suspicion, it was something deeper, something primal. Granny had mentioned that Ava's house still stood, untouched since her death. It was a place shunned by the villagers, left to decay on the edge of the village. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I made my way there, compelled by a force I couldn't fully understand. The path was barely visible, overgrown and forgotten, Trees crowded the trail, their branches twisted into unnatural shapes. The house loomed ahead, a dilapidated structure that seemed to sag under the weight of time and memories. The walls were cracked, the roof bowed, vines creeping up its sides like fingers clutching at the past. The door creaked open with a push, revealing a darkness that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of rot and neglect. The floorboards groaned under my weight, the house a tomb filled with the remnants of a life long gone. In the corner of the main room, beneath a tattered, moldy blanket, I found it, Ava's flesh mask. Even before I uncovered it fully, I felt its presence, a cold, malevolent force that seemed to radiate from it. The mask was grotesque, a patchwork of flesh stitched together, its surface pale and sickly. The eye holes were dark, empty voids, and the mouth was twisted into a grotesque mockery of a smile. It was as if the mask itself was mocking the living, taunting those who dared to look upon it. I knew I should leave, but I couldn't. My hand, trembling, reached out to touch it, the surface slick and clammy, almost as if it were still alive. As my fingers brushed against the flesh, a shock of cold shot through me, and I felt something dark and ancient stir in the back of my mind. From the moment I touched the mask, my world began to unravel. The mask invaded my thoughts, turning my dreams into a landscape of nightmares. I would wake in the dead of night, heart pounding, Ava's voice whispering in my ear, soft, insistent, and filled with a sorrow that was not her own. During the day, the world around me began to distort. Shadows moved at the edges of my vision, and in every reflective surface, I saw faces that weren't mine, faces twisted in agony, their features melting and blending in ways that defied reason. The mask's presence was constant, a weight that pressed down on my mind, even when I locked it away, trying to distance myself from its influence. But the mask wasn't content with mere torment. It wanted more. It demanded to be worn, to complete the ritual it had started with Ava, and I, despite every instinct screaming against it, found myself drawn to it, powerless to resist its pull. My reflection began to change. At first it was subtle, a paleness to my skin, a slight blur in the lines of my face. But soon, the changes became undeniable. My face was losing its shape, the features blurring, as if the mask was imprinting itself on me, fusing its image with mine. I tried to fight it, tried to cling to my sanity, but the mask's influence was too strong. It was as if it had become a part of me, a shadow that I couldn't escape. Then came the visions, flashes of a life that wasn't mine. I saw Ava, saw her performing the ritual, the mask fusing to her face, her screams of agony echoing in my mind. I felt her fear, her desperation, and then her madness. The lines between her thoughts and mine blurred, and I realized with a growing horror that the mask was not just a curse, it was a conduit, a bridge between the living and the dead. The final night arrived, a full moon hanging low in the sky, its light casting long, eerie shadows across the village. I found myself returning to Ava's house, the mask in my hands, its surface cold and clammy as if it were breathing. The air was thick, suffocating, as if the very atmosphere was alive with anticipation. I stood in the same room where I had first found the mask, the walls pressing in, the darkness alive with memories that were not mine. The mask seemed to pulse in my hands, urging me to complete the ritual, to finish what Ava had started. I raised the mask to my face, my hands shaking. It wasn't a decision, it was a compulsion, a force beyond my control. The mask felt heavier than before, as if it had absorbed the weight of the memories, the torment and the anguish of all who had worn it. I knew that once I placed it on my face, there would be no turning back, yet I couldn't stop myself. As the mask touched my skin, a cold shock rippled through my body, followed by a searing pain. It felt as though the mask was fusing with my flesh, melting into my skin, becoming one with me. I screamed, a sound that tore through the night, but it wasn't just my voice. I could hear Ava's cries mingling with mine, a chorus of agony that echoed through the empty house. My vision blurred, and the world around me began to twist and distort. The walls seemed to close in, the darkness pressing down like a suffocating weight. I stumbled, trying to pull the mask away, but it was too late. It was a part of me now, and as it merged with my face, I felt a flood of memories, Ava's memories, pouring into my mind. I saw her life through her eyes, felt her vanity, her desperation, her fear as she realized the horror of what she had done. And then I saw beyond her, to the girl whose face she had stolen. The girl's spirit, filled with rage and sorrow, had been trapped within the mask, waiting for someone else to fall into the same trap to continue the cycle of suffering. I felt the girl's presence now, her anger burning within me, mingling with Ava's madness. The mask was a conduit, a vessel that held the spirits of the tormented, and now it was my turn to carry that burden. As the pain subsided, I realized I was no longer alone in my mind. Ava and the girl were there, their thoughts mingling with mine, their voices whispering in the darkness. I could feel them, like shadows pressing against the edges of my consciousness, trying to take control, to pull me into the abyss. But there was something else, a darker presence, older and more malevolent than either of them. It was the mask itself, a relic of ancient power, a cursed object that had claimed countless lives over the centuries. It fed on the souls of those who wore it, consuming them, trapping them in an endless cycle of torment. I tried to resist, to fight against the pull of the mask, but it was too strong. The darkness closed in, and I felt myself slipping away, my identity dissolving into the sea of lost souls. I was becoming one with the mask, just another spirit trapped in its endless cycle of pain. And then, just as I thought I would lose myself completely, I heard a voice that wasn't Ava's or the girl's. It was my own, buried deep within, a faint whisper of defiance. I clung to it, using it as an anchor, fighting to retain some semblance of who I was. I don't know how long I struggled, but eventually the darkness began to recede. The other voices faded, their presence still there but distant, as if pushed to the edges of my mind. I was still me, but I could feel the mask's influence, its power coursing through my veins. I had survived the ritual, but at what cost? As I looked into the cracked mirror, I saw my face, a face that was both mine and not mine. The features were familiar, but there was something off, something wrong. My eyes, once clear, now held a darkness that wasn't there before, a reflection of the curse that had taken root within me. I knew I couldn't stay in the village. The mask had marked me, and the villagers would recognize the signs. They would know that I had become the next bearer of the curse. So I left that night, disappearing into the mountains, carrying the mask with me. It had become a part of me, and I knew that no matter where I went, it would always be there, a shadow in the corner of my mind, a reminder of the price of vanity. The story of Ava and her flesh mask was no longer just a legend. It was my reality, and I was doomed to live it. The mask would continue its cycle, claiming more souls, trapping them in its web of torment, and I, as its latest victim, could only hope to keep it at bay, to prevent it from consuming me completely. But deep down, I knew the truth. The mask was patient, and eventually it would win. And when it did, I would join the ranks of the lost, just another soul swallowed by the darkness.